Welcome back. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Sega games not on Sega hardware. Now, Sega's been out of the hardware business now for 15-16 years since the Dreamcast died, and Sega has released a ton of games since then, so obviously I could not cover them all in this one episode. I do intend for this to be a series though, so we're going to start with 8 games here. Let's take a look. November of 2006 would see the release of the Sega Genesis Collection developed by Digital Eclipse Software. This compilation contains some of Sega's best games from the 16-bit era and was released on the PlayStation 2 and PSP. You'll get classics like all 3 Golden Axe games, the first 2 Sonic the Hedgehog games, as well as Shinobi 3 and Shadow Dancer, ultimately totaling 28 games from the Sega Genesis. You also get 5 more unlockable games, such as Altered Beast the arcade game and Zaxxon. The PSP version even has a different set of unlockable games. There are also a number of trailers, interviews, and trivia that you can browse on the disc, all giving insight into these games and their creators. The emulation here is surprisingly good given the hardware. It isn't perfect, however. You'll notice some off-tune sound effects here and there, as well as a few missing jingles as well. The music itself is solid, and the graphics look great on a CRT and progressive scan. Sega would go on to release a more comprehensive and better emulated version of this a few years later on the PS3 and Xbox 360. But if all you're rocking is a PlayStation 2, this disc is cheap and very playable. Sega was no stranger to great sports games, and in March of 2008, Sumo Digital would develop Sega Superstars Tennis for the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, Wii, Xbox 360, and even the Nintendo DS. As you would have guessed, this Sega-themed tennis game is packed with mascots and characters from the vast world of Sega franchises, including tennis courts themed from various games as well. Up to 4 players can play at once in co-op and versus modes, as well as a ton of extra modes to keep the party going long after you beat the main game. Graphically, everything is ultra colorful and done in the style and feel of each of the various franchises represented. Even the music corresponds to the franchises, and most of it is worth listening to while you play. Gameplay is really easy to get into in the beginning, with even younger players able to understand immediately what you have to do. Every character does have a special move that keeps things interesting, but that just serves to keep the action fresh every time you face a new opponent. The best part about this one is that it's incredibly cheap, easily obtained for a tenner or less on damn near every platform. During the holiday in 2002, Sega shocked the hell out of me with a new Shinobi game, exclusively for the PlayStation 2. After a massive earthquake releases hellspawn all over a ruined Tokyo, it's up to our hero to slay the bad guys and find out just what the heck is going on. Gameplay is fully 3D now, and you'll be attacked from all sides by all sorts of enemies. You have your trusty shurikens to stun enemies, as well as your sword to dispatch them. You have a number of new moves as well, including wall running and stealth dashes, and you'll need every single one of them, as this game gets really hard in the later levels. Luckily, a great presentation drives the gameplay, including a fantastic 60 frames per second. The environments are well detailed, and animation is top notch, and even the textures are fairly solid. I really like the soundtrack as well, and even though it lacked that great Yuzo Koshiro feel, it still felt like it belonged in each stage. Here again, this great game is virtually given away complete in box. I've seen it in the single digits in mint condition. All I can say is this: make sure you own it, because there is no reason at all not to. This one would get a sequel a few years later, but we'll save that one for another episode. AM2 would release Virtua Fighter 4 on the PlayStation 2 in early 2002. This port of the Sega Naomi 2 arcade original was quite solid, but it's the second release of the game I want to actually cover here. Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution was released a year later, and man is it one of the best software releases from Sega post the Dreamcast collapse. This installment of the VF series would see massive improvements in every single area of the game. The gameplay was much faster and fluid now, with deeper combos and counter mechanics, much better balancing between characters, and without question, the most varied fighting styles of any 3D fighter of the time. The graphics would see a full-on renaissance as well, making the previous installments of the game look ancient in comparison. The animation alone put it on a pedestal few games could ever hope to compete with, and each and every stage and character looked fantastic. The explosive presentation didn't just stop with your eyes either, because Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution also had some of the best music ever to grace a fighting game. You get a mix of just about everything: techno, rock, ambient sounds, and even some ancient sounding riffs that all fit the game like a glove. There were also some great modes apart from the regular versus and arcade modes, including a quest mode similar to the Soul Calibur games, and an awesome tutorial to teach you how to play it. And just when you thought the awesome Virtua Fighter 4 Evolution had nothing else to give, you discover it hands you perhaps one of the best extras in video game history: Virtua Fighter 10th Anniversary. The developers decided to take the fighting engine of Virtua Fighter 4 and meld it with the presentation of the very first Virtua Fighter. You get the flat shaded polygons, the stages, and the original soundtrack all in 60 frames per second glory. I can't tell you how awesome it was to get this, and to see the original aesthetic running so beautifully truly brought back memories of my days in the arcade as a teen. It's a great addition that I revisit often, and was a true show of love from Sega for their fans. This edition was released separately in Japan as its own game, and I don't think you guys in Europe got a retail release at all. No matter, the North American release is peanuts, so if you want one of that generation's best fighters, nab it for next to nothing. In October of 2004, the Xbox port of AM2's Outrun 2 was released, ported by Sumo Digital. The original had been done on Sega's Chihiro arcade hardware, which was essentially an OG Xbox with more RAM. That meant that this port is nearly spot on in every way. I had always been a big fan of Outrun, and AM2's work in general, and this game here is one of the best arcade racers ever released in my opinion. It's purely built on top of the love of driving and speed. There's no slowing down to 60 miles an hour to take a corner here. Instead, you'll be power sliding damn near the entire way, and that sense of free-flowing speed that is rarely interrupted is almost therapeutic in its execution. The game just feels right, almost as if this was the way physics would work in a car lover's perfect world. The game is gorgeous too, with a blistering 60 frames per second pushing around its lush, heavily detailed environments. The draw in here is worlds away from the stuff we got on the Saturn and PlayStation 1, with no noticeable pop-in whatsoever. There's also a number of great remixes of the classic Outrun songs, Splash Wave, Magical Sound Shower, and Passing Breeze, as well as a few additional tunes when you get tired of those. All in all, This is a great arcade racing game that demands being played by Sega fans no matter how old they are. And like the other games in this episode, it's really affordable. There would be upgraded editions of this game under the banner of Outrun 2006 Coast to Coast, released for the PC, PlayStation 2, PSP, and Xbox, which were quite awesome as well. Jet Set Radio had been a pretty fun game, so in early 2002 Sega decided to release a sequel to that game, Jet Set Radio Future, developed by Smilebit. This original Xbox exclusive would change up a great many things about the first game, but remains a fun and truly unique game. The world is fully connected now, and the time limits from the previous game are largely gone. You begin the game as a wannabe GG, a Tokyo street gang fighting the corruption of the local government and vying for control over various territories from other gangs. You use graffiti as a way of taking over an area, forcing confrontations with the other gangs. Areas usually have multiple objectives, like races, battling corrupt cops, unlocking new areas, new graffiti designs, and story-based missions. The game looks great even today, with a smooth, cel-shaded presentation and outstanding animation. The soundtrack is also pretty good, with lots of artists I've never heard of, but everything fits the game extremely well. Unfortunately, this game tanked hard on the Xbox, and not many people got to play it. A shame too, as it pretty much doomed the franchise to obscurity. If you still have an OG Xbox that works, this is definitely a really good, cheap game to pick up. With any luck, it will be backwards compatible on the Xbox One when that feature finally launches. Another Smilebit joint, Sega would release Panzer Dragoon Orta in late 2002, again exclusively for the original Xbox. I was so incredibly happy to see this series return after the death of the Dreamcast, and man, what a return it was. One of the very best looking games from that generation, Orta was a technical and artistic masterpiece. Colorful textures, great light sourcing, and a blistering frame rate all came together to produce a truly stunning package. The soundtrack got in on the goodness as well, with the score sounding very reminiscent of the Saturn games thanks to members of the original team being present. The gameplay would see the Dragon evolution mechanics from the original series stepped up, now with the ability to change your Dragon type on the fly to fit the situation. You would have heavy, base, and glide wing options, basically boiling down to offensive and defensive types. You would also gain the ability to dash and slow down based on the Dragon type you use, allowing you to manipulate your position around enemies to better suit the situation. The gameplay otherwise is tried and true Panzer Dragoon. Shoot and dodge enemies through fantastically designed levels and kill big bosses at the end. Also like previous games, this one presents a solid challenge to seasoned players, and if you're new to the series, be prepared to have your ass whooped for a while. Also included is the Pandora's Box collection of extras from the second game, loaded with goodies like cutscene viewers, stats for your playtime, art from the game, and even the entire PC version of the very first Panzer Dragoon. Smilebit crafted an impeccably good game in this release, and it's a total package of audio and visual style, coupled with some of the best on-rails gameplay the genre has ever known. Shockingly, this one is still cheap and easy to come by, making it another no-brainer to add to your Sega collection. WoW Entertainment would develop House of the Dead 3 for the original Xbox, and Sega would release it in late 2002. This arcade port was another Chihiro hardware-based game, meaning the Xbox port was pretty much perfect right from the get-go. You begin the game as the daughter of one of the guys from the first game. The world has gone through hell though, and all manner of the undead have risen up to put humanity on the brink of destruction. House of the Dead 3 is a great looking game with a solid frame rate and much higher geometry in the characters and environments, and some truly outstanding texture work for a game of its era. The soundtrack is unfortunately not as strong as the previous two games, but still manages to provide a decent atmosphere. Gameplay is for the most part the same on-rails blastathon that it was before, but now you get a shotgun as your standard weapon, and the scoring plays a much more important role than it did before, as it now directly influences the ending you get, of which there are multiples. You see the return of the multiple paths of the previous games, but now they are given as a choice before you actually attack the main run of the level. This provided an otherwise short game with some much needed replay value. There is also of course the two-player co-op, which has always been incredibly fun, and it's no exception here. As an added bonus, you also get House of the Dead 2 unlocked after you beat the main story mode. As with most of the games in this episode, this one is cheap as hell to obtain. The original Xbox version can be gotten for a tenner, with the Wii and PlayStation 3 versions being cheap as well. No matter how you choose to play this one, it's a solid shooter and a welcome addition to the House of the Dead franchise. Now when Sega came out as a third party, man, they came out both guns blazing. And when they came out, they were releasing continuations of IPs, and they were improving how they were making games. And some of the games in this episode really showed, man, that Sega was serious about being a third party. And therefore, a number of years, I was so happy to have their games on so many platforms. And that means that this series that I'm looking at now has a lot of content that we can go over. Please down in the comments, let me know. Is there a Sega game you want to see covered? Is there a series you want to see covered? No matter what it is, as long as it was on non-Sega hardware, I definitely want to hear about it. I am Sega Lord X. I really appreciate you guys watching. I'll catch you next time.